Who and when built the Giza Pyramids? Could it be that they are much older than it is commonly accepted by the modern Egyptologists? In this episode, we shall try to answer the question who and when really built the Giza Pyramids according to the various ancient texts and other evidence. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Alexander, and in this episode we shall talk about who and when built the Giza Pyramids. And let's start with the mainstream vision of modern Egyptology and how, according to them, the Giza Pyramids were built and by whom and when. And according to mainstream version, 3 pyramids at Giza were built in the 3rd millennium BC, before current era, between about 2600 and 2500 years BC by 3 pharaohs, and the Great Pyramid at Giza, the biggest one, was built by Pharaoh Khufu, also called Cheops, because the first name Khufu is ancient Egyptian name and the second name, the Cheops, is the name later told by Greek historians. The second pyramid was built by Hafre or Hefren, and the third and the smallest pyramid was built by Menkaure or Mykerinus, depending on what ancient texts we are here describing. And those 3 pyramids were built in very ancient times, just a few hundred years after the ancient Egyptian civilization blossomed and actually rapidly expanded. So it is very suspicious at first. And according to this vision, those pyramids were built using primitive tools, which is actually not true, because pyramids are very precisely built and are very precise buildings. And also in the pyramids, the technology is astonishing. But about technology, I will talk in later episode. But let's start with what evidence there is to actually support this claim by mainstream Egyptology that those pyramids were built by those 3 pharaohs and during exactly this time frame, this 3rd millennium BC. And actually there is only one true account of Herodotus, who tell us in his histories that those 3 pyramids were built by those 3 pharaohs that I just mentioned. And other texts, which I will dive deep into later, are actually telling us a very different story. And other evidence to support that those pyramids were built by Khufu, Hafre and Menkaure are very scarce. And actually there is only one inscription, one cartouche of the Khufu in the entire Great Pyramid. Because the entire Great Pyramid, the biggest one of the pyramids, does not actually contain any inscriptions. There are just bare walls. And the only inscription was found in the very chambers at the top of the pyramid. And actually these chambers are like leftovers after the construction, are not just chambers in which there was something held or there was sarcophagus. But actually these chambers very up on the pyramid were just like after construction chambers. Some say that they were living chambers. And in one of those chambers, there is a single cartouche of the name Khufu. But actually, according to several different researchers, starting with Zechariah Sitchin and then with Scott Creighton, this inscription could be actually fake and could be a hoax created by Colonel Howard Wise during his expeditions in Egypt. This subject is very controversial, and actually this one and single inscription found in the Great Pyramid is itself controversial. It could be a hoax. So actually, as we see, there is no evidence that Khufu, this pharaoh, could build the Great Pyramid, because the only inscription found inside the Great Pyramid could be actually a hoax. We don't know if it is legitimate ancient inscription, it was just forged by Colonel Howard Wise. And other texts actually do not mention the Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure building the Giza Pyramids, and actually about those three pharaohs, and especially about the Khufu, so the builder of the biggest and greatest monument in Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza, there are actually there are not many mentions, and actually about Khufu there are just scarce evidence. So as we see, this vision of modern Egyptology is based on very scarce evidence, and actually as we see, this inscription could be illegitimate, it could be hoax, so this whole vision of modern Egyptology could be actually fake. And actually there are many different stories and different legends about the builders of the pyramids of Giza, which are not only aligning with other material evidence, but also create a completely different, at the same time coherent version of our ancient ancestors building the pyramids in Giza, which is very coherent and very in alignment with other evidence. And let's start with this alternative vision. So according, for example, to the Hermetic texts, and Hermetica was the philosophy of the ancient Egypt and Greece, and according to the sources of those ancient philosophy deriving from Egypt, three pyramids at Giza were built by the god of wisdom Thoth. And Thoth built the Giza pyramids before the Great Flood occurred, because in one of his dreams he saw the annihilation of the entire globe and the global deluge, and because of that dream he decided to build the pyramids at Giza in order to preserve the pre-Diluvian knowledge and for it not to be destroyed during this cataclysm. And there are other texts which support this notion. And for instance, the Coptic tradition, and according to Copts, this tradition is also derived from very ancient times, even before the first pharaohs. And according to the Coptic tradition, which was mentioned and which survived to our times in medieval Arab chronicles, these same pyramids were also built before the Great Flood by the king or the ruler called Surit. And actually these Arab chroniclers who mentions these stories of Copts of this building of pyramids also tells that this Surit was no other person than Thoth. So as we see, this Coptic traditions also supports the notion that the pyramids were built by someone called Thoth or Surit. And also in this Coptic tradition there is mention of the Great Flood, and according to those traditions, King Surit also dreamed about the incoming disaster, this incoming deluge, about 300 years before it actually occurred, and also decided to build these pyramids, and also he decided to build them in order to preserve this prehistoric knowledge to be preserved for future generations. So as we see, these different stories tell us about the same building of the pyramids in a completely different version of our history that is portrayed by modern Egyptologists, and as we see, those two stories are coherent, but they are also coherent with the Bible and with the apocryphal books of Enoch, because as I mentioned in my other video, there is plenty of evidence that the Egyptian god of wisdom Thoth and Enoch and Surit were all one and the same person. And actually Enoch, according to the Bible and according to the apocryphal book of Enoch, was also living before the deluge and was actually the grandpa of Noah. And as we know, the Noah survived the Great Flood, so it is also coherent with this Coptic version according to which the pyramids were built about 300 years before the Great Flood. If Enoch was the grandpa of Noah and during the Noah's lifespan there occurred this Great Flood. So as we see, there's a completely different vision of our history which actually mentions the Great Flood and the pyramids, and which is totally different than this vision of modern Egyptology, which is not supported by many evidence and which mentions the Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, the three pharaohs building the pyramids using primitive tools. And actually there is plenty of physical evidence that this Coptic and this Hermetic tradition could tell us about the real events. And as I mentioned in my other videos, because I'm an independent researcher and also an author, my book about lost civilizations, Déjà Vu, has been already published in Polish, and now I am translating it into English. It will be soon available on Amazon. And according to many different ancient texts, the Great Flood could be the event of the end of the last ice age, as I mentioned on my other videos. And this time occurred about 9600 BC, which is in accordance with the Plato's Atlantis, because according to Greek philosopher Plato, during this time Atlantis sank, and also during this time there was this end of the last ice age, and this ice age, as it was ending, there was this melting of the glaciers, which also is connected to the flood myth. And about the flood myths I also talk about in my other videos, and also I will talk about in future. And this event of the Great Flood could be this end of the last ice age, when there was this this meltwater suddenly just created the global deluge, and we've got plenty of evidence of, for example, skeletons scattered throughout very different parts of the globe, and which are dated to that era. And this would mean that those 3 pyramids should be built before the 9600 BC, so thousands of years before it is alleged by the mainstream Egyptology the pyramids were built. But it may sound fantastic, but actually we've got evidence, and for example Robert Bovell and Graham Hancock, two researchers and authors, found that the 3 pyramids at Giza are aligned with the Orion constellation as it looked like during the epoch before the 9600 BC, and actually it was very accurate, the epoch of 10,500 BC. And as we see, it is coherent with those versions of a few hundred years before the Great Flood occurred, so many hundred years before the 9600 BC and this final end of the last ice age. And we should remember that this ending could be previous, so actually this ending could span, for instance, in the years 10,500 BC to 9,600, so this event could be really after this Giza-Orion alignment. So as we see, we've got even physical evidence that the pyramids could be built about 10,500 BC before the Great Flood, as it is mentioned in the Coptic and Hermetic traditions and texts. And as we see, it is more coherent than the version of the mainstream Egyptology, and we've got more evidence. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, because on my channel I am also publishing many other aspects of this same alternative vision of our history. So if so, don't forget to check out my channel. That would be all for today. Thank you for your attention, and to the next video. Goodbye.